Book 5, The Church of the Merchants, Part 1, of The Prophets of Religion, by Upton Sinclair. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Church of the Merchants. Mammon led them on, Mammon, the least erected spirit that fell from heaven, for even in heaven his looks and thoughts were always downward bent, admiring more the riches of heaven's pavement, trodden gold, than aught divine or holy else enjoyed in vision beatific. Let none admire that riches grow in hell, that soil may best deserve the precious bane. Milton. The Head Merchant. Ours is the era of commerce, as its propagandists never weary of telling us. Business is the basis of our material lives, and consequently of our culture. Businessmen control our politics and dictate our laws. Businessmen own our newspapers and direct their policy. Businessmen sit on our school boards and endow and manage our universities. The Reformation was a revolt of the newly developing merchant classes against the tyrannies and abuses of feudal clericalism. So in all Protestant Christianity one finds the spirit, ideals, and language of trade. We have shown how the symbolism of the Anglican Church is of the palace and the throne. In the same way that of the nonconformist sects may be shown to be of the counting house. In the view of the middle-class Britisher, the nexus between man and man is cent per cent. And so in their Sunday services the worshippers sing such hymns as this: Whatever, Lord, we lend to Thee, repaid 1,000-fold shall be. Then gladly will we give to Thee, who givest all. The first duty of every man under the competitive system is to secure the survival of his own business. So on the Sabbath, when he comes to deal with eternity, he is practical and explicit. Nothing is worth a thought beneath, but how I may escape the death that never, never dies. How make mine own election sure, and when I fail on earth secure a mansion in the skies. Just as the priest of the aristocratic caste figures God as a mighty conqueror, marching as to war, with the cross of Jesus going on before, so the preacher to the trader figures the divinity as a glorified merchant keeping books. This head merchant has a monopoly in his line. He knows all his rivals' secrets, so there is no getting ahead of him, and nothing to do but obey his word, as revealed through his clerical staff. The system is oily with protestations of divine love, but when you read the comments of Luther upon Calvin, and of Calvin upon Luther, you understand that this love is confined to the inside of each denomination. And even so restricted, there is not always enough to go around. Recently I met a Presbyterian clergyman to whom I remarked, "I see by the papers that you have just finished a church building." "Yes," he answered, "and I have had 3 offers of a new church." I did not see the connection, and asked, "Because you were so successful with this one?" The reply was, "They always take it for granted that you want to change when you've finished a new building, because you make so many enemies." The businessman puts up the money to build the church. He puts up the money to keep it going. And the first rule of a businessman is that when he puts up the money for a thing, he runs that thing. Of course he sees that it spreads his own views of life, it helps to maintain his tradition. In the days of Anu and Baal, we heard the proclamation of the divine right of kings. In these days of Mammon, we hear the proclamation of the divine right of merchants. Some 15 years ago the head of our coal trust announced during a great strike that the question would be settled "by the Christian men to whom God in His infinite wisdom has given control of the property interests of this country." And on that declaration all pious merchants stand, whatever their denominations, Catholic, Episcopalian, Baptist, Methodist, Presbyterian, or Hebrew. Their Sabbath doctrines are alike, as their weekday practices are alike. Whether it is Rockefeller shooting his Bayonne oil workers and burning alive the little children of his miners, or Smooth John Wanamaker paying starvation wages to department store girls and driving them to the streets, or that clergyman who, at a gathering of society ladies, members of the Law and Order League of Denver, declared in my hearing that if he could have his way he would blow up the home of every coal striker with dynamite, or the Reverend R.A. Torrey, Dean of the Bible Institute of Los Angeles, who refused to employ union labor on the $1,000,000 building of the Institute, declaring that "the church cannot afford to have any dealings with a band of firebugs and murderers." Herr Bebel. The business of the clerical department of the Merchants and Manufacturers Association is to justify the processes of trade, and to preach to clerks and employees the slave virtues of frugality, humility, and loyalty to the profit system. The depths of sociological depravity to which some of the agents of this association have sunk is difficult of belief. 12 years ago I was invited to address the booksellers of New York, in company with a well-known clergyman of the city, the Reverend Madison C. Peters. This gentleman's address made such an impression upon me that I recall it even at this distance. A string of jokes, spoken with an effect of rapid-fire smartness, and simply reeking with commercialism. I could not describe it better than to say that it was on the ethical level of the "Letters of a Self-Made Merchant to His Son." Again, I attended a debate on socialism, in which the capitalist end was taken by another famous clergyman, pastor of the Metropolitan Temple, the Reverend J. Wesley Hill. He was so ignorant that when he wished to prove that socialism means free love, he quoted a writer by the name of Herr Bebel. He was so dishonest that he garbled the writings of this Herr Bebel, making him say something quite different from what he had meant to say. I could name several clergymen of various denominations who have stooped to that device against the socialists, including the Catholic Father Belford, who says that we are mad dogs and should be stopped with bullets. Or consider the Reverend Thomas Dixon. This gentleman's pulpit slang used to be the talk of New York when I was a boy, and when I grew up and came into the socialist movement, behold, here he was, Chief Inquisitor of the Capitalist Holy Office. I had a friend, a man who saved my life at a time when I was practically starving, and to whom therefore I owe my survival as a writer. This friend had been a clergyman in a Middle Western state, and had preached Jesus as he really was, and so was hated and feared, like Jesus. It happened that he was unhappily married, and permitted his wife to divorce him so that he might marry the woman he loved; for which unheard of crime the organized hypocrisy of America fell upon him like 1,000 devils with poisoned whips. The Reverend Dixon's holy rage was fired. He applied his imagination to my friend's story, producing a novel under the title of "The One Woman." And it is as if you were reading the story of Jesus and the Magdalene transmitted through the personality of a he-goat. Of late years this clerical author has turned his energies to negrophobia and militarism, making millions out of motion picture incitements to hatred and terror. The pictures were made here in Southern California, and friends in the business have described to me the pious propagandist in the position of St. Anthony, surrounded by swarms of cute and playful little movie girls. Or take the Reverend James Roscoe Day, D.D., S.T.D., L.L.D., D.C.L., L.H.D., a leading light of the Methodist Episcopal Church, who offers himself as comic relief in our clerical vaudeville. Dr. Day is Chancellor of Syracuse University, a branch of the Mental Munitions Department of the Standard Oil Company, his function being to manufacture intellectual weapons and explosives to be used in defense of the Rockefeller fortune. It is generally not expected that the makers of ruling class munitions should face the dirty and perilous work of the trenches. But 10 years ago, during a raid by an active squad of muckrake men, Chancellor Day astonished the world by rushing to the front with both arms full of star shells and bombs. He afterwards put the history of this gallant action into a volume, The Raid on Prosperity. And if you want the real thrill of the class war, here is where to get it. The Chancellor is a quaint and touching figure, an enthusiast and dreamer, idealist and martyr, in whom the ordinary human virtues have been fused, absorbed, transformed, and sublimated into a new supreme virtue of loyalty to exploitation, patriotism for profiteering. He began life as a working man, he tells us, in the good old American fashion of hustle for yourself. But he differed from other Americans in that he had an instant intuitive recognition of the intellectual and moral excellence of plutocracy. The first time he met a rich man, he quivered with rapture, he burst into a hymn of appreciation. So very quickly he was recognized as a proper person to have charge of a mental munition works, and the ruling classes proceeded to pin medals upon the bosom of his academic robes, D.D., S.T.D., L.L.D., D.C.L., L.H.D. The Chancellor knows the masters of our profit system, those consummate geniuses of manufacture and trade, by which the earth has yielded up her infinite treasures. And having been at the same time in intimate daily communion with the Almighty, he can tell us the Almighty's attitude towards these prodigies. God has made the rich of this world to serve Him. He has shown them a way to have this world's goods, and to be rich towards God. God wants the rich men. Christ's doctrines have made the world rich, and provide adequate uses for its riches. Also the Chancellor knows our great corporations, and gives us the Almighty's views about them. They mean that the forces with which God built the universe have been put into the hands of man. Likewise, by divine authority we learn that the sympathy given to socialism is appalling, it is insanity. We learn that the income tax is a doctrine suited to the dark ages, only no age ever has been dark enough. Somebody raises the issue of tainted money, and the Chancellor disposes of this matter also. As a deputy of divinity, he settles it by Holy Writ. Paul permitted meat offered to idols to be eaten in the fear of God. And then, to make assurance doubly sure, he settles it with plain human logic, and you are astonished to see how simple, under his handling, the complex problem becomes, how clear and clean-cut is the distinction he draws for you. Every boy knows that one cannot take stolen goods without being a partaker with the thief, But the proceeds of recognized business are quite a different thing. Holy Oil. And here is Billy Sunday, most conspicuous phenomenon of Protestant Christianity at the beginning of the 20th century. For the benefit of posterity, I explain that Billy is a baseball player turned evangelist, who has brought to the cause of God the crowds and uproar of the diamond, also the commercial spirit of America's most popular institution. He travels like a circus, with all the press agent work and newspaper hurrah. He conducts what are called revivals, in an enormous tabernacle built especially for him in each city. I cannot better describe the Billy Sunday circus than in the words of a certain Sidney C. Tapp, who brought suit against the evangelist for $100,000 damages for the theft of the ideas of a book. Says Mr. Tapp in his complaint: The so-called religious awakening or trail hitting is produced by an appeal to the emotions, and in stirring up the senses by a combination of carrying the United States flag in one hand and the Bible in the other, singing, trumpeting, organ playing, garrulous and acrobatic feats of defendant, by defendant in his talk leaping from the rostrum to the top of the pulpit, lying prone on the floor of the rostrum on his stomach in the presence of the vast audience, and from thence into a pit to shake hands with the so-called trail hitters, and the vulgar use of plaintiff's thoughts contained in said books. Said harangues and vulgarisms of said defendant, and horns, drums, organs, and singing by said choir, and vast audience, which are assembled by means of said newspaper advertisements, for the purpose of inducing a habit of free and copious flow of money through religious and patriotic excitement produced by and through the vulgarisms, scurrility, buffoonery, obscenity, and profanity of defendant, pretending to be in the interest of the cause of religion, through what he denominates hitting the trail, the real object being to induce a religious frenzy and enthusiasm which he announces in advance is to result in large audiences composed of thousands of people generously contributing vast sums of money on the last day and night of the so-called revival, which is invariably appropriated by the defendant, and through which scheme and device defendant has become enormously wealthy. As I write, the evangelist is in Los Angeles, and twice each day he holds forth to a crowd of 10 or 15,000. In addition, the newspapers print literally pages of his utterances. The entire Protestant clergy for a score of miles around has been hitched to his triumphal chariot and driven captive through the streets. Here in this dignified city of Pasadena, home of millionaire brewers and chewing gum kings, all the churches have been plastered for weeks with cloth signs: "This church is cooperating in the Sunday campaign." To give a sample of the intellectual level of the performance, here is what Billy has to say about modern thought. All this blasphemy against God and Jesus Christ, all this sneering, highbrow, rotten, loathsome, higher criticism, wriggling its dirty, filthy, stinking carcass out of a beer mug in Leipzig or Heidelberg. Whether willingly or reluctantly, the preachers sit upon the platform and smile while Billy thus slangs the devil, and being themselves, poor fellows, at their wits' end to draw the crowd, they watch and see how he does it, and then return to their own churches and try the same stunt. So the manners of the baseball diamond spread like a contagion. I open my morning paper and find a picture of an intense-looking clerical gentleman, the Reverend J. Whitcomb Brower, pastor of the Baptist Temple. He is discussing certain slanderous rumors which he has heard about Billy Sunday, and he offers $10,000 reward to anyone who can prove these things, though, as he says, "The dirty, low-down, contemptible, weazen-brained, impure-hearted, shriveled-souled, gossiping devils do not deserve to be noticed. Scandal-mongers, gossip-lovers, reputation-destroyers, hypocritical, black-hearted, green-eyed slanderers, corrupt, devil-possessed, vile debauches, immoral, sin-loving, vice-practicing, underhanded sneaks, carrion-loving buzzards and foul-smelling skunks." You will be prepared after this to hear that when the socialists were near to carrying Los Angeles, this clergyman preached a sermon in support of the candidate of booze, gas, and railroads. Insofar as Billy Sunday is trying to keep the neglected youth of our streets from drinking, gambling, and whoring, no one could wish him anything but success. But his besotted ignorance, his childish crudity of mind, make it impossible that he could have any success except of a delusive nature. He is utterly devoid of a social sense, utterly unaware of the existence of the forces of capitalism which are causing depravity 10 times as fast as all the evangelists in creation can remedy it. So he is precisely like the Catholics with their charity, cleaning up loathsome and unsightly messes for 1,000 years, and never stopping to ask why such messes continue to come into existence. More than that, I question whether the spirit of commercialism which he fosters does not help the development of evil more than his preaching hinders it. The newspapers always report the cost of the tabernacle and of the free will offering, which amounts to hundreds of thousands of dollars in each campaign. In each city the expenses are guaranteed by men who are generally the most sinister exploiting forces of the community. They welcome and fete him, and he visits their homes, and is in every way one of the crowd. After the big silk strike in Paterson, New Jersey, the employers, Jews and Catholics included, all subscribed a fund to bring Billy Sunday to that city, and it was freely proclaimed that the purpose was to undermine the radical union movement. This was never denied by Sunday himself, and his whole campaign was conducted on that basis. Later Billy came to New York, where he met a certain rich young man, perhaps 1,000 times as rich as any that lived in Palestine. This young man came to Billy and said, "What shall I do to inherit eternal life?" And Billy told him to keep the commandments: "Do not commit adultery, do not kill, do not steal, do not bear false witness, honor thy father and thy mother." The young man answered, "All these have I kept from my youth up." And Billy said, "Yet lackest thou one thing: sell all that thou hast, and distribute unto the poor, and thou shalt have treasure in heaven, and come follow me." And when he heard this he was very sorrowful, for he was very rich. No, I have got the story mixed up. That is what happened in Palestine. What happened in New York is that Billy said, "I am delighted to meet you, Mr. Rockefeller." And Mr. Rockefeller said, "Come, be my guest at my palace in the Pocantico Hills, and then we will go together, and you may preach submission to my wage slaves in the oil factories at Bayonne and elsewhere." And Billy went to the palace, and went and preached to the wage slaves, telling them to beware the "stinking socialists," and to concentrate their attention on the saving of their souls. So the rich young man was delighted, and he sent for all the newspaper reporters to come to his office at 26 Broadway, and told them what a great and useful man Billy Sunday is. As the New York Times tells about it, Mr. Rockefeller seldom gives interviews, and certainly he has never been charged with having an excess of verbally expressed enthusiasm on any subject. But he talked for an hour and a half about the evangelist. He was full of the subject of Billy Sunday. Billy did New York a lot of good, he said. He went on to tell of 187 meetings held in 100 different factories, attended by 50,000 men. That's good work. And he expressed his satisfaction with Sunday's theology. He believes the Bible from cover to cover, and that is good enough for me. The Sunday campaign had cost $200,000, and if it had stopped here, if it was not kept up, it would be poor business, a poor dividend on the $200,000 and the work invested, but we expect to get dividends in the next year. Again, you note the symbolism of the counting house. End of Book 5, Part 1.